The crack of gunfire echoed across Westbrook Range as a woman in faded jeans and a simple flannel shirt stepped up to the firing line, her presence drawing sneers from the crowd of elite marksmen. They'd never seen anyone dare approach the prestigious Mountain States Championship dressed like she'd wandered in from a hardware store. But when Sarah Mitchell raised that weathered rifle and sent her first bullet singing through the air, the mocking laughter died in their throats, replaced by a silence so profound you could hear the wind whisper through the pines. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the Colorado mountains as competitors gathered for the most coveted shooting competition west of the Mississippi. Among the sea of sponsored jerseys and custom gear stood Sarah Mitchell, clutching her grandfather's old Winchester like a lifeline. Her work boots were scuffed, her clothes practical rather than fashionable, and her quiet demeanor marked her as an outsider in this world of precision and prestige. Victoria Sterling, three-time state champion, noticed Sarah first. Dressed in her signature crimson shooting jacket with gold embroidery, Victoria commanded attention wherever she went. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against her custom-built rifle as she surveyed the competition grounds. When her gaze landed on Sarah, her lips curved into a disdainful smile. "Look what the cat dragged in," Victoria murmured to her circle of admirers. Derek Lawson, a renowned instructor with his own line of shooting accessories, followed her gaze and chuckled. "Probably thinks this is a turkey shoot at the county fair," he added, adjusting his designer sunglasses. The registration tent buzzed with activity as competitors checked in, each name carrying weight in the shooting community. When Sarah approached the desk, the volunteer barely glanced up from his clipboard. "Name?" he asked mechanically. "Sarah Mitchell," she replied softly, sliding her entry form across the table. The volunteer paused, scanning the list twice. "I don't see any sponsors listed. You understand this is a professional competition, right? Entry fee is $500. Sarah pulled a worn envelope from her jacket pocket, counting out the bills with careful precision. The volunteer raised an eyebrow but processed her registration, handing her a number that seemed heavier than its paperweight. Marcus Chen, a young hotshot who'd been making waves in competitive shooting circles, overheard the exchange. His equipment alone cost more than most people's cars, and he wore his success like a badge of honor. $500 to embarrass yourself. Some people have more money than sense," he said loud enough for Sarah to hear. Sarah's fingers tightened around her rifle case, but she simply nodded politely and moved toward the practice area. The Winchester had been her grandfather's, passed down through generations of Mitchell hunters. Its stock bore the marks of countless seasons in the wilderness, each scratch telling a story of survival and skill. The practice range offered competitors a chance to warm up before the main event. As Sarah unpacked her rifle, she couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between her equipment and that of her fellow shooters. Custom barrels, precision scopes that cost more than her truck, and accessories she couldn't even name surrounded her. "Is that thing even legal?" Amanda Price, another competitor, whispered to her shooting partner. "Looks like it belongs in a museum." Sarah began her practice routine, a ritual she'd performed thousands of times in the hills behind her cabin. She didn't use a shooting mat or specialized gear. Instead, she found her stance naturally, her body remembering the lessons learned from years of putting food on the table. Her first practice shot drew more attention than she'd hoped. The bullet struck dead center, but it was her form that caught experienced eyes. There was something different about the way she moved, something that spoke of instinct rather than training. Victoria sauntered over, her entourage in tow. "Honey, this isn't deer season. We're shooting paper here, not trying to fill the freezer." Her voice dripped with condescension as she examined Sarah's rifle. "That scope looks older than my grandmother. It gets the job done." Sarah replied quietly, checking her ammunition. Derek joined the growing crowd around Sarah's station. Let me guess, Daddy taught you to shoot cans off a fence? He gestured to her worn rifle case. This is precision shooting, sweetheart. You need precision equipment. The head judge, Harold Fitzgerald, approached to investigate the commotion. A stern man with decades of experience, he'd seen every type of competitor pass through these grounds. His eyes narrowed as he studied Sarah's rifle, then softened slightly as he recognized the craftsmanship beneath the wear. Everything in order here? He asked, his tone neutral but commanding respect. Just welcoming our new friend, Victoria said smoothly, though I'm not sure she understands what she's gotten herself into. Harold's gaze moved to Sarah. Your equipment meets regulations. That's all that matters. He paused, something flickering in his expression. Mitchell, you said? Any relation to Tom Mitchell? Sarah's eyes met his briefly. My grandfather. Harold nodded slowly, a ghost of recognition crossing his features before he schooled his expression back to neutrality. Carry on then. Competition starts in 30 minutes. As the crowd dispersed, whispers followed Sarah like autumn leaves. In the wind, she heard fragments of conversations, each one painting her as the day's entertainment, the amateur who'd provide comic relief in this serious competition. The competition format was grueling, multiple stages testing different skills, from long-range precision to rapid-fire accuracy. Points accumulated across events, with the final stage determining the champion. The current record, held by a shooter from Texas, had stood for 15 years. Sarah found herself assigned to the first group, shooting alongside Victoria and Marcus. As they approached the 100-yard range, spectators gathered along the viewing area. The local media had arrived, cameras ready to capture the defending champion's performance. Ladies first, Derek announced, gesturing grandly to the firing line. Let's see what our mountain girl can do. Sarah stepped forward, her movements deliberate and calm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The crowd's chatter faded as she settled into position. Without the fancy equipment others used, she relied on techniques passed down through generations, her breathing steady as mountain air. The range officer called the start, and Sarah's world narrowed to the target. Her first shot rang out, followed by 9 more in measured succession. As the spotters called out scores, a hush fell over the crowd. 10, 10, 10! The perfect string continued until the final shot. Another 10. Perfect score. Victoria's smile faltered. Marcus stopped adjusting his scope mid-turn. Even Derek's smugness wavered as the reality sank in. Beginners. Luck, someone muttered, but uncertainty had crept into the atmosphere. Victoria took her position next, her technique textbook perfect. She shot well, remarkably well by most standards, but not perfect. A single 9 marred her scorecard. As the competition progressed through various stages, a pattern emerged that couldn't be ignored. Sarah's consistency defied explanation. Moving targets, varying distances, challenging wind conditions, nothing seemed to faze her. While others relied on technology to calculate adjustments, she read the wind like an old friend, her corrections instinctive and precise. By midday, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The mocking whispers transformed into theories and speculation. Who was this woman who shot like the mountains themselves, guided her aim? During the lunch break, Sarah sat alone beneath a pine tree, eating a simple sandwich from her cooler. Victoria approached, her earlier arrogance replaced by calculating interest. You've shot competitively before, Victoria stated rather than asked. Not exactly, Sarah replied, taking another bite of her sandwich. Then where? Military? Law enforcement? Sarah shook her head. Just the mountains. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Nobody shoots like that without professional training. What's your angle? Before Sarah could respond, a commotion near the administration tent drew their attention. An elderly man in an expensive suit had arrived, accompanied by several officials. His presence commanded immediate respect, conversations dying as people recognized him. Jonathan Reeves, patriarch of the Reeves shooting dynasty and owner of the largest firearms manufacturing company in the country, had made an unexpected appearance. His arrival at competitions was rare, reserved for only the most significant events. Harold Fitzgerald hurried to greet him, their conversation animated but too distant to hear. Sarah noticed Jonathan's gaze sweep across the grounds, pausing briefly when it found her. Something passed between them, a nod so slight it might have been imagined. The afternoon stages brought new challenges. Rapid target acquisition, shooting from unstable platforms, and a long-range segment that pushed equipment to its limits. Sarah's performance remained unwavering, each shot finding its mark with mechanical precision. By the final stage, word had spread beyond the competition grounds. Social media buzzed with updates about the unknown shooter, challenging not just the competition record, but potentially the world record. Professional photographers jostled for position, their cameras trained on the woman in simple clothes who turned the shooting world upside down. The final stage combined everything: distance, precision, speed, and adaptability. Targets would appear at various ranges, requiring instant decisions and perfect execution. The current competition record stood at 498 out of 500 possible points. The world record was 499. Sarah was the last to shoot, her accumulated score putting her in position to win if she maintained her performance. The crowd pressed against the barriers, phones raised to capture history in the making. As Sarah approached the firing line, she paused, running her hand along the Winchester's stock. For a moment, her composure cracked, revealing a depth of emotion that made several spectators lean forward. The timer started. Targets appeared and disappeared with mechanical precision, each one a test of skill and nerve. Sarah moved like water, flowing from position to position, her shots ringing out in perfect rhythm. The crowd counted silently, tension building with each successful hit. With one target remaining, Sarah had matched the world record. The final target appeared at maximum range, wind flags showing a complex pattern that would challenge even computer-assisted calculations. Time seemed to stop as Sarah adjusted her position. Without any visible calculation or hesitation, she fired. The bullet's path carved through the crosswind, finding the 10 ring with surgical precision. The range officer's voice cracked as he announced the score. 500, perfect score, new world record. The crowd erupted, but Sarah remained. Still, her eyes closed as if in prayer. When she finally turned, tears tracked down her cheeks, though her expression remained serene. As officials verified the score and photographers surrounded her, Jonathan Reeves made his way through the crowd. The respect shown to him was palpable, people parting like water before a ship. He stopped before Sarah, his weathered face breaking into a smile that transformed his stern features. "You shoot just like your mother," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. The revelation hit like a physical force. Sarah Reeves Mitchell, daughter of Elizabeth Reeves, the legendary shooter who disappeared from public life 25 years ago after dominating the sport. "Grandfather," Sarah whispered, the word barely audible but picked up by nearby microphones. The story unfolded in the shocked silence. Elizabeth Reeves, Jonathan's daughter and heir to the Reeves shooting legacy, had walked away from it all to marry Tom Mitchell, a mountain guide and conservationist. They'd raised their daughter away from the spotlight, teaching her to shoot not for glory, but for survival, for connection with the land. Victoria stood frozen, her earlier condescension now a weight around her neck. Derek's designer sunglasses couldn't hide his shock. Marcus looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Why?" someone called out. Why hide who you are? Sarah's voice carried clearly across the range. Because I wanted to earn my place, not inherit it. Because the mountains teach you what fancy equipment never can. Because my parents showed me that the true mark of a shooter isn't in the technology they carry, but in the respect they show for the skill itself. Harold Fitzgerald stepped forward, a knowing smile on his face. I suspected when I saw that rifle. Tom Mitchell was the finest hunter I ever knew, and Elizabeth, well, we all remember Elizabeth. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Sarah stood surrounded by a transformed crowd. The same people who'd mocked her appearance now saw the depth they'd missed, the mastery hidden beneath simplicity. Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. Your mother would be proud. You've honored both legacies today, the Reeves precision and the Mitchell wisdom. The media clamored for interviews. Sponsors appeared from nowhere, and Victoria Sterling herself approached with something like humility in her eyes. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice sincere. I forgot that true skill doesn't announce itself with flash and dazzle. Sarah accepted the apology with grace, her grandfather's rifle still cradled in her arms. The mountains teach patience, she replied, and humility, lessons I'm still learning myself. As the day's events concluded, Sarah found herself at the center of a story that would reshape the competitive shooting world. But she looked past the cameras and crowds to the mountains beyond, where the real lessons lived in every sunrise, every tracked animal, every perfectly placed shot that meant the difference between eating and going hungry. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. The Reeves name carried weight she'd have to navigate, but the Mitchell wisdom would guide her path. As her grandfather often said, and her father had proven, true wealth wasn't measured in trophies or titles, but in the quiet confidence of knowing exactly who you are. The Winchester rifle, worn smooth by generations of careful hands, had one more story to tell. And Sarah Reeves Mitchell, was just getting started. The evening air carried the scent of pine and possibility as the crowd refused to disperse, their excitement electric in the fading light. Tournament officials scrambled to manage the unprecedented situation, while photographers continued capturing every angle of the woman who just shattered a world record with equipment most wouldn't trust for backyard plinking. Sarah felt the weight of 100 gazes, each one reassessing everything they thought they knew about competitive shooting. The revelation of her lineage had transformed the narrative from a Cinderella story to something far more complex. A tale of heritage deliberately hidden, skill honed in solitude, and the courage to forge one's own path. Ms. Reeves Mitchell, a reporter corrected herself, pushing through the crowd with a microphone extended. Can you tell us why you chose to compete under your married name? Were you trying to prove something? Sarah's hands remained steady on her grandfather's rifle as she considered the question. The simple gold wedding band on her finger caught the last rays of sunlight. My husband's name is Mitchell, she said quietly. In the mountains where we live, that name means something. It means understanding the land, respecting what you take from it, knowing that every shot counts. Jonathan Reeves stood protective at her side, his presence keeping the more aggressive media at bay. His eyes held decades of pride and something else, regret perhaps for the years lost to stubborn silence between father and daughter. Victoria Sterling lingered at the edge of the group, her crimson jacket now seeming garish in the mountain twilight. The transformation in her demeanor was complete. Gone was the sneering champion, replaced by someone grappling with her own assumptions about success and authenticity. I'd like to apologize properly, Victoria said when the crowd thinned slightly. Not just for today, but for what this sport has become. We've lost something, haven't we? In all our pursuit of technology and advancement. Sarah's expression softened. Tools are just tools. It's what we do with them that matters. She gestured to the surrounding peaks, their silhouettes dark, against the purple sky. Out there, a missed shot means an empty table. It teaches you differently. Derek Lawson approached next, his designer sunglasses now tucked away, revealing eyes filled with genuine curiosity. Would you consider teaching? I mean, what you did today, that wasn't just about aim. There was something else. Before Sarah could respond, Harold Fitzgerald intervened. There's the matter of the prize ceremony, he announced, though his formal tone couldn't hide his satisfaction. And I believe several sponsors are eager to speak with our new world record holder. The thought of corporate negotiations made Sarah's shoulders tense. Jonathan noticed immediately, stepping forward with the authority that had built an empire. All business discussions go through me tonight, he declared. My granddaughter has had quite enough excitement for one day. As they moved toward the presentation area, Marcus Chen fell into step beside them. The young shooter who'd mocked her entry fee now walked with humbled steps. My grandfather used to tell stories, he said quietly, about learning to shoot with iron sights, reading wind by watching grass move. I thought it was just old-timer talk. Wisdom often sounds that way, Sarah replied, until you need it. The presentation platform had been hastily decorated, officials working to create something worthy of a world record ceremony. News vans lined the parking area, their satellite. Dishes pointed skyward like modern totems. The contrast between the media circus and the serene mountains created a surreal atmosphere. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. Her husband David, who'd stayed behind to tend their small ranch. She'd call him later when she could find somewhere quiet, away from the chaos she'd never intended to create. The ceremony itself became a study in contrasts. Sarah stood in her worn boots and simple clothes, accepting a crystal trophy that seemed to belong to another world. The check for $50,000 felt strange in her hands, more money than she and David made in a year running wilderness expeditions and managing their sustainable forestry project. Jonathan's speech was brief but powerful. 25 years ago, my daughter Elizabeth chose love over legacy. I was too proud to understand then what I see clearly now. She didn't abandon our tradition. She elevated it. She took our precision and married it to something deeper, something real. His voice caught slightly. Today, her daughter reminded us all what marksmanship truly means. As applause filled the evening air, Sarah noticed movement at the back. Of the crowd, an elderly woman in a faded dress stood apart from the celebration, her posture straight despite her obvious years. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them, recognition of a shared understanding about what truly mattered. The sponsors descended like wolves, scenting opportunity. Precision Optics wanted her as their spokesperson. Custom Firearms offered a signature line. Ammunition manufacturers competed with increasingly lucrative proposals. Through it all, Sarah maintained the same quiet composure she'd shown on the range. I appreciate your interest, she told them, collectively, but I need time to consider what aligns with my values. The corporate representatives blinked, unused to athletes who didn't leap at endorsement opportunities. As the formal events wound down, smaller conversations sprouted like wildflowers. Young shooters approached hesitantly, asking questions about technique, about mindset, about finding authenticity in a sport increasingly dominated by technology and money. Can you really learn to read wind without instruments? A teenage competitor asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Sarah knelt to meet her gaze. Watch the birds, she said softly. They've been reading air currents longer than we've been walking upright. Everything you need to know is already there. You just have to learn to see it." The girl nodded solemnly, as if receiving ancient wisdom. Perhaps she was. Victoria reappeared as the crowd finally began dispersing. "I've been thinking," she began, then paused, choosing her words carefully. "Would you shoot with me tomorrow? Not competing, just shooting. I'd like to learn what I've been missing." The request surprised Sarah, Victoria Sterling asking for instruction. "Dawn," Sarah replied after a moment, "bring your simplest rifle." As the parking lot emptied and the mountains reclaimed their silence, Harold Fitzgerald made one final approach. "Your grandfather, Tom," he said quietly, "taught me to track when I was just starting as a range officer. Best woodsman I ever knew. Never understood why Elizabeth gave up everything for him." He smiled. "Watching you today, I finally get it. She didn't give up anything. She gained everything." Sarah found herself alone with Jonathan as the last vehicle departed. Her grandfather looked older in the moonlight, the weight of years and regret visible in the lines of his face. "I wrote her letters," he said finally. "Your mother. Every month for 5 years after she left. Never sent them. Pride's a terrible thing, Sarah. It cost me my daughter and nearly cost me you." Sarah touched his arm gently. "She spoke of you often, said I had your eye for detail, your patience. She never stopped loving you. She just loved Dad more." They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge above the peaks. The Winchester rifle rested between them, a bridge across generations. "Will you come to Sunday dinner?" Jonathan asked. "My wife, your grandmother, she's followed your mother's life from afar all these years. Newspaper clippings, town gossip, anything she could find. She'd very much like to meet you properly." The invitation hung in the air like morning mist. Sarah thought of her simple cabin, of David waiting with their 2 dogs and a pot of venison stew. Then she thought of her mother, who'd carried the burden of family separation while teaching her daughter to find strength in simplicity. "We'd be honored," she said finally, "but fair warning, we don't do formal, and David might bring his guitar." Jonathan's laugh echoed off the mountains. "Perfect. Marion will love that. She always said the house was too quiet after Elizabeth left." As they walked toward the parking area, Sarah's phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen and she answered with a smile. "Saw you on the news." His warm voice carried across the connection. "Nice shooting, Annie Oakley. Should I start calling you Ms. Reeves now?" "Don't you dare," she laughed. "Though I might have accidentally agreed to Sunday dinner with my grandparents. About time. I'll bring my famous cornbread. Your mum always said they'd come around eventually." After the call, Sarah realized the evening had brought more than records and revelations. It had begun healing fractures that ran deeper than rivalry between old money and mountain wisdom. Her phone buzzed again, text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Young shooters asking for advice, old-timers sharing stories about her parents, even a message from someone claiming to have one of her mother's competition rifles. As grandfather and granddaughter reached their vehicles, one last surprise awaited. The elderly woman from the crowd stood beside Sarah's battered pickup truck, her weathered hands resting on the tailgate. "Forgive an old woman's intrusion," she said, her voice carrying the soft accent of the deep mountains. "I knew your mother when she was small, taught her to can preserves while Jonathan taught her to shoot." She pulled a small package from her purse. "Elizabeth sent me jam every Christmas until she passed. Thought you might want her recipe book." Sarah accepted the worn leather journal with trembling hands. Inside, her mother's careful script recorded more than recipes. Notes. About life, about balance, about finding joy in simple things. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, clutching the book like treasure. The old woman patted her cheek. "You did good today, child. Showed them what matters. Your mama's watching, proud as can be." As the woman walked away into the darkness, Jonathan shook his head in wonder. Mrs. Henley, haven't seen her in 20 years. Elizabeth always said she made the best blackberry jam in 3 counties. The drive home took Sarah through winding mountain roads she could navigate blindfolded. Her headlights caught the eyes of deer grazing in meadows, the same herds she and David monitored for the wildlife department. This was her world, not the manicured ranges and corporate sponsors, but the raw beauty of wilderness that demanded respect and offered wisdom to those who listened. David waited on their porch, flanked by their German shepherds, Rex and Luna. The cabin's windows glowed warmly against the forest darkness. No cameras here, no reporters or sponsors. Just home. World champion, huh? David grinned as she parked. Does this mean I have to curtsy now? Sarah threw a pine cone at him, laughing as the dogs bounded over to greet her. It means you're doing dishes for a week while I figure out what to do with all these sponsorship offers. Inside, over reheated stew and fresh bread, Sarah spread the day's business cards across their scratched kitchen table. David whistled low at some of the numbers mentioned. We could fix the barn roof, he mused. Maybe even get that new truck you've been eyeing. Sarah traced the wood grain of the table, thinking. Or we could start that youth program we talked about. Bring city kids out here, teach them what the mountains taught us. David's eyes lit up. Using your name to make a difference instead of just making money. Your mom would approve. They talked late into the night, planning possibilities. The world record had opened doors, but Sarah was determined to walk through them on her own terms. The Winchester rifle rested in its familiar place by the door, ready for tomorrow's hunt, a reminder that some things remained constant despite sudden fame. Near midnight, Sarah stepped onto the porch, breathing in the crisp mountain air. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, its voice carrying ancient wisdom. The stars wheeled overhead, the same constellations that had guided her ancestors, both Reeves entrepreneurs and Mitchell mountaineers. Her phone displayed dozens of missed calls and hundreds of social media notifications. Tomorrow would bring interviews, decisions, and the challenge of balancing newfound recognition with long-time values. But tonight belonged to the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd honored both sides of her heritage. The crystal trophy sat on the mantel, catching moonlight through the window. Beside it, Sarah had placed her mother's recipe book, Jonathan's business card, and a photo of her parents on their wedding day. Elizabeth in a simple dress, Tom in his best flannel shirt, both glowing with the joy of choosing love over expectation. As Sarah headed to bed, David already snoring softly, she paused by the window. The mountains stood eternal against the star-filled sky, indifferent to human dramas of pride and recognition. They'd been here long before the Reeves built their empire, before the Mitchells learned their woodland ways. They'd remain long after today's excitement faded into memory, but stories would persist of the woman who showed up at a prestigious competition in work clothes and shattered records with an old rifle, of the champion who chose substance over style, who proved that true skill transcends equipment, and who reminded everyone that the heart of marksmanship beats not in technology, but in the ancient conversation between human intention and natural law. The dawn would bring new challenges. Victoria would arrive for her lesson, humbled and eager to learn. Sponsors would call with refined proposals. Jonathan would navigate the delicate process of reconnecting with his granddaughter without overwhelming her chosen life. The shooting world would debate what Sarah's performance meant for the future of the sport. But first came sleep and dreams of wind-bent grass and patient breathing, of mountains teaching their timeless lessons to those wise enough to listen. Sarah Mitchell, Reeves Mitchell, had indeed shattered more than records today. She'd broken through the artificial barriers between tradition and authenticity, proving that excellence needs no pedigree beyond dedication and respect for the craft itself. The last sound she heard before sleep was the whisper of pine trees in the night breeze, nature's own voice reminding her that the greatest victories aren't measured in trophies or titles, but in the quiet knowledge of having remained true to oneself while honoring the legacy of those who came before. Tomorrow's sun would rise on a changed landscape in competitive shooting, but here in the mountains, the essential truths remained unaltered. Every shot matters, respect is earned through actions, not words, and the most powerful inheritance isn't money or fame, but the wisdom to see clearly and the courage to stand firmly in one's truth. The world had met Sarah Mitchell today. Tomorrow, they'd begin to understand what she represented, not just the merger of two family traditions, but the embodiment of something increasingly rare in modern sports: authenticity earned through hardship, skill honed by necessity, and success measured by standards deeper than any scoreboard could capture. As midnight passed into the small hours, the mountains kept their watch, guardians of stories older than memory and promises of stories yet to unfold. Sarah's perfect score would enter the record books, but her larger victory, bridging worlds, that had seemed impossibly distant, would ripple through the shooting community for generations to come. The Winchester rifle waited by the door, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, a symbol of continuity in a night that had rewritten all the rules. In the end, it wasn't about the score, the record, or even the revelation of her heritage. It was about the moment when authenticity met opportunity, and a woman raised by mountains showed the world what happens when you stop trying to impress others and simply honor the gifts you've been given. The story was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. Dawn broke over the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose as Sarah prepared her grandfather's Winchester for the morning training session with Victoria Sterling. The irony wasn't lost on her. Yesterday's tormentor now seeking wisdom from the woman she dismissed as unworthy. David had already left for his morning rounds, checking trail cameras and monitoring the wildlife corridors they protected. The normalcy of their routine felt precious after yesterday's upheaval, a reminder that fame was just a temporary visitor in their carefully constructed life. Victoria arrived precisely at sunrise, her usual crimson shooting jacket replaced by a practical fleece and jeans. The transformation extended beyond clothing. Gone was the haughty tilt of her chin, the calculating gleam in her eyes. She carried a basic Remington 700, the kind of rifle a newcomer might buy for their first hunting season. "I haven't touched this since my father gave it to me 15 years ago," Victoria admitted, running her hand along the simple wooden stock. "Too busy chasing sponsorships and custom builds to remember why I started shooting in the first place." Sarah gestured toward a fallen log that served as their shooting bench. "Why did you start?" Victoria's laugh held more sadness than mirth. "Would you believe me if I said it was to spend time with my dad? He worked construction, came home exhausted every night, but Saturdays were ours, just him, me, and whatever old rifle he'd managed to fix up that week." She paused, lost in memory. "Somewhere along the way, I forgot about those Saturdays, started believing that success meant leaving all that behind." They spent the first hour on fundamentals: breathing, position, the meditation of aligning, body and intention. Sarah taught as her mother had taught her, with patience rooted in understanding rather than superiority. The mountains provided their classroom, the wind their most demanding instructor. "Feel how the air moves differently. Through the valley?" Sarah asked, pointing to the swaying aspens below. "That's thermal rise. The sun heats the slopes unevenly, creating currents you can read if you know where to look." Victoria's first shots scattered wide, her muscle memory corrupted by years of technological dependence. But gradually, something shifted. Her breathing deepened, her movements became more fluid, less mechanical. By the third hour, her groups had tightened considerably. "It's like learning to hear again," Victoria murmured after a particularly good string. All these years, I've been drowning out what my body was trying to tell me with gadgets and calculations. As they paused for water and the simple sandwiches Sarah had packed, her phone buzzed with messages. Jonathan had been busy. 3 major sponsors had already agreed to fund the youth program she and David had discussed. The Mountain Heritage Shooting Foundation would launch next month, bringing underprivileged kids to learn not just marksmanship, but wilderness ethics and conservation. "That's brilliant," Victoria said when Sarah shared the news. "Count me in as a volunteer instructor. I need this as much as those kids will." The morning session concluded with Victoria achieving her best groups in years. Not perfect, but honest, earned through understanding rather than equipment. As she prepared to leave, she hesitated. "I've been thinking about yesterday," she began, "about how quickly we all turned on you, how easily we believed you were less than us because of how you looked, what you carried." She met Sarah's eyes directly. "I've realized I've been playing that same game my whole career, judging, dismissing, climbing over others. I want to apologize not just for yesterday, but for who I've become." Sarah considered her words carefully. "Apologies are good starts. What matters is what comes next." Victoria nodded slowly. "I'm withdrawing from the circuit for a while. Going to spend some time with my dad. Maybe help him with those restoration projects he's always talking about. Figure out who I am without the sponsors and rankings." After Victoria left, Sarah found herself alone with the morning sun climbing higher above the peaks. Her phone continued buzzing. Interview requests, sponsorship offers, messages from shooters around the world sharing their own stories of feeling like outsiders in their own sport. One message stood out. A young woman from inner-city Detroit who'd been saving for 3 years to afford a basic rifle and a competition entry fee. Sarah typed a quick response, inviting her to be the first participant in the Mountain Heritage program. The girl's reply came instantly, filled with excitement and disbelief. This, Sarah realized, was how change happened. Not through grand gestures, but one connection at a time. The week that followed blurred into a whirlwind of carefully chosen commitments. Sarah and David met with lawyers to establish the foundation properly, ensuring it would serve its intended purpose without becoming another corporate shell. Jonathan proved invaluable, his business acumen balanced by hard-learned lessons about the cost of putting profit above purpose. Sunday dinner at the Reeves estate became a healing ritual. The mansion, with its manicured grounds and museum-quality firearms collection, could have been intimidating. Instead, Marion Reeves filled it with warmth, pulling out photo albums and sharing stories of Elizabeth's childhood that made Sarah laugh and cry in equal measure. "She was just like you at that age," Marion said, pointing to a picture of young Elizabeth, muddy and grinning, holding a rabbit she'd tracked for hours. Drove Jonathan crazy with her stubbornness. He wanted her in ballet classes. She wanted to be in the woods. David charmed them both with his easy manner and genuine interest in their stories. His guitar became a regular feature of their gatherings, old folk songs mingling with Marion's refined laughter and Jonathan's gradually loosening formality. The shooting world, meanwhile, struggled to process the implications of Sarah's performance. Forums debated endlessly about technology versus skill, tradition versus progress. Several prominent competitors quietly traded their high-tech setups for simpler equipment, trying to recapture something they'd lost along the way. Marcus Chen published a thoughtful editorial admitting his own prejudices and calling for the sport to re-examine its values. Derek Lawson closed his Instagram account and opened a training facility focused on fundamentals rather than gear. Even some sponsors began shifting their marketing, emphasizing skill development over equipment superiority. 3 months after the competition, Sarah stood before the first group of Mountain Heritage participants, 12 kids from backgrounds as diverse as America itself. Some clutched borrowed rifles, others had never held a firearm before. All shared the same mixture of excitement and uncertainty she remembered from her own early days. "Before we touch a single trigger," she began, "we need to understand what we're really doing here. This isn't about competition or proving anything to anyone. It's about connecting with the tool, with the environment, with yourself." Over the following weeks, the program evolved beyond anyone's expectations. The kids learned to track animals, identify plants, read weather patterns. They studied wildlife conservation and forest management alongside ballistics and breathing techniques. Most importantly, they learned that excellence comes not from expensive equipment, but from patience, observation, and respect. Victoria became a regular instructor, her journey from arrogance to humility serving as a powerful example. She'd reconciled with her father, and together they'd started restoring vintage rifles for the program, giving new life to forgotten craftsmanship. Harold Fitzgerald volunteered as safety officer, his decades of experience ensuring the program met the highest standards while maintaining its focus on accessibility and authentic learning. Even Jessica Hayes reached out eventually, her email, long and rambling, full of justifications that gradually gave way to genuine remorse. Sarah chose not to respond immediately. Some bridges took time to rebuild, and trust, once broken, required more than words to repair. But she saved the email, recognizing in its awkward honesty the first steps of a journey similar to Victoria's. A year after setting the world record, Sarah found herself back at the Mountain States Championship, this time as an honorary judge and youth program coordinator. The atmosphere had changed palpably. Less posturing, more genuine camaraderie. Competitors still pursued excellence, but with a renewed understanding that tools were meant to serve skill, not replace it. The girl from Detroit, Jasmine, competed in her first match that day. She didn't win, didn't even place in the top 10, but her form was solid, her understanding deep. More importantly, she helped two newer shooters with their stance, passing on what she'd learned with the same quiet confidence Sarah recognized from her own mother. As the competition concluded, Sarah stood with David, watching the sunset paint the mountains in familiar hues. The Winchester rifle, now retired from competition but still used for teaching, rested in its case at their feet. The crystal trophy had found its place not on a mantle, but in the Foundation's headquarters, where it inspired young shooters to pursue excellence through dedication rather than dollars. "Think your mom would approve?" David asked, his arm around her waist as they watched the kids helping to clean up the range. Sarah smiled, thinking of the recipe book that now sat in their kitchen, its margins filled with her own notes about life and balance. "I think she'd say we're just getting started." The mountains agreed, their ancient silence holding space for new stories, new connections, new understanding. The world record remained unbroken, but that had never been the point. The real victory lay in the transformation rippling outward, Victoria finding her authenticity, Marcus questioning his assumptions, young shooters learning that true skill speaks in actions rather than advertisements. As twilight deepened, Sarah gathered the program participants for their evening reflection circle. This had become her favorite part of each training day, when the formal instruction ended and the real learning began. Stories shared around a simple campfire, wisdom passed not from expert to student, but from human to human. "Who wants to share what they discovered today?" she asked, the firelight dancing across eager faces. Hands shot up, voices overlapping with excitement about wind patterns noticed, breathing techniques mastered, moments when everything clicked into place. Sarah listened, offered guidance where needed, but mostly just held space for their discoveries. Later, Driving home through the mountain passes, she and David talked about expanding the program, perhaps partnering with conservation groups to create a broader wilderness education initiative. The foundation had received enough donations to run for years, but Sarah was more interested in depth than breadth, changing lives thoroughly rather than touching them lightly. Her phone, now set to strict boundaries, showed one message she'd been expecting. The International Shooting Federation had officially invited her to help develop new competition guidelines, balancing tradition with innovation. Change at the highest. Levels often moved slowly, but the invitation itself marked a significant shift. That night, as she and David sat on their porch watching stars emerge above the peaks, Sarah reflected on the journey from humiliation to transformation. The mockery, the soda-stained cardigan, the sneering faces, all had been necessary steps toward this moment of quiet satisfaction. Funny how things work out, David mused, reading her thoughts as he often did. If they'd been nice to you, from the start, none of this would have happened. Sarah laughed, remembering her mother's words about finding gifts in unexpected places. The Winchester rifle, now passed to the next generation of mountain shooters, had indeed carried forward more than bullets. It had transmitted values, connected separated worlds, and reminded everyone that authenticity always outlasts artifice. The program flourished beyond their wildest hopes. Kids who'd never left the city learned to read tracks in snow, to understand the patient rhythm of wilderness. Some discovered a passion for competitive shooting, others for conservation, still others for the quiet confidence that comes from mastering something difficult through dedication rather than shortcuts. Victoria's transformation continued, her instruction shifting from technique to philosophy. She and her father published a book together, Returning to Center, Rediscovering the Heart of Marksmanship, that became required reading in many shooting programs. Jonathan and Marion became regular fixtures at the youth camps, their initial formality melting into genuine grandparent warmth. Jonathan especially seemed renewed, finding in the program echoes of what he'd lost with Elizabeth and reclaimed. Through Sarah, on the second anniversary of the world record, a documentary crew arrived to film the program. They'd expected a story about shooting sports, but found something richer, a narrative about healing divides, honoring heritage while embracing change, and the power of authentic excellence to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. As the crew interviewed participants, a common theme emerged. The program taught far more than marksmanship. It demonstrated how to see clearly, act deliberately, and respect both tradition and innovation. Parents reported changes in their children's confidence, focus, and relationship with nature. The final scene of the documentary showed Sarah leading a group meditation before shooting practice, the morning mist rising off the mountains, as young voices joined in the breathing exercise she'd learned from her mother, who'd learned it from her father, the chain of wisdom unbroken despite years of separation. Remember, Sarah's voice carried clearly in the still air, the target is just a mirror. What you're really aiming at is your own potential, your own truth. Everything else, the score, the equipment, the recognition, that's just noise. Listen deeper. The cameras captured the scene. Children from vastly different backgrounds united in purpose, led by a woman who'd transformed mockery into mission, personal vindication into collective elevation. The Whitney rifle might have gone into honored retirement, but its legacy lived on in every steady breath, every focused eye, every young person learning that true excellence begins not with what you carry, but with who you choose to become. As the documentary ended, text appeared on screen. The Mountain Heritage Shooting Foundation has trained over 500 young people, with 100% of participants reporting increased confidence and connection to nature. Sarah Mitchell continues to hold the world record, Though she no longer competes professionally, she divides her time between the foundation, conservation work, and quiet mornings in the mountains with her husband, David. The final shot showed Sarah walking into the dawn mist, rifle over her shoulder, disappearing into the landscape that had shaped her, taught her, and ultimately given her the platform to reshape an entire sport's understanding of what matters most. The record books would always show that perfect score, that moment when assumptions shattered like clay targets. But the true measure of that day lay not in numbers, but in the lives changed, the bridges built, and the ancient wisdom restored to its rightful place at the heart of human endeavor. In the end, Sarah Mitchell had done more than prove herself. She'd reminded an entire community that excellence isn't about having the best equipment or the right name. It's about showing up authentically, respecting your tools and teachers, and understanding that every shot, like every moment, is an opportunity to align with something greater than personal glory. The mountains stood witness to it all, their silence holding stories of transformation, their peaks catching first light each morning as new students arrived to learn not just how to shoot, but how to see, how to breathe, how to belong to something larger than themselves. And in that belonging, in that connection between past and future, tradition and innovation, the real victory revealed itself. Not in shattered records or humbled critics, but in the quiet revolution of returning to what matters most. The patient development of skill, the honest acknowledgement of heritage, and the courage to stand firm in one's truth, no matter who's watching or what they might say. The story that began with mockery had become a legacy of dignity restored, wisdom reclaimed, and the timeless truth that authenticity, when given its moment, doesn't just prevail, it transforms everything it touches. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.